Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
This episode of iPad Pros is sponsored by Spark. Learn more at sparkmailapp.com.
Unlike the ScanSnap, it has a touch screen built into it, and then you can actually create your own shortcuts in the scanner, like in the scanner software on the scanner itself, to do, a series of one-sided, one-page PDFs, or a series of, two-sided but one-page PDFs, and it will properly separate those out into the different files. But the killer thing for me is that it is wireless, but I don't even use the wireless feature because it's got a USB port on the back. And you can set this to scan directly to the USB flash drive. So I'll scan a series of documents onto the flash drive and then pull that out, pop it into the iPad with an adapter, and I'm good to go. I can just open the Files app, I can rename the files there, drag them where I want them to go, and that has been so much faster.
Welcome to another episode of iPad Pros. I'm excited to share this lengthy discussion I had with Greg at the Shepherd's Crook Orphan Ministry. We had time to dive into a bunch of different topics, and I learned quite a bit from Greg. Greg shared a number of apps and accessories I've never heard of, and can't wait to start incorporating them into my own workflows. Before we dive into the episode, I want to take a second to thank Spark by Readle for sponsoring this episode. This is my main email app on my iPhone and iPad. And I'll be sharing more about Spark later on in this episode, as will Greg, who also uses Spark. You can learn more now by going to sparkmailapp.com. If you want to support the podcast, first off, go and download Spark by Readle. You can also get episodes early at patreon.com/iPadPros for as little as $1 a month. Thank you to everyone who currently or has in the past supported the podcast there. Finally, if you haven't reviewed the podcast on Apple Podcasts, I'd really appreciate just a few minutes of your time to open up the podcast app on your iPhone or iPad and leave a review. These reviews are extremely helpful in helping others discover this show. To those that have left a review, you have my sincere thanks and gratitude. It really does mean a lot. With that, here's my interview with Greg. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Greg.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So can you first kind of introduce yourself and broadly how you use the iPad, kind of how long you've been using it for?
Sure. My name is Greg Godwin. I work for a nonprofit called the Shepherd's Crook Orphan Ministry. My wife and I have 9 kids, 2 cats, and 2 tree frogs. Half of those pets have been added to the house in the past year, so we've had kind of a busy pandemic. And I've been working at the same nonprofit for almost 13 years. It'll be 13 years next month. And so I have, over the years, come to use the iPad as my primary computer, not just for work, but also for, personal tasks and document management and everything that needs to happen there, and for some of the volunteer stuff that I do for our church. So I do pretty much everything with it. There's just a handful of things that I still need a Mac for, but yeah, and so the iPad is just my primary computer, and I've spent the last couple of years sort of toying with the physical setup to get it the way that I want it to be, and I keep thinking that I've got it there, but there's always something to tweak and try to make a little bit more optimal, but yeah, I'm very happy using the iPad here.
So why the iPad for you? What about it? Is it the flexibility to use it in tablet mode often, or what about it makes it work for you?
I don't use it in tablet mode very often. Most of the time, I've got 2 iPads that I work from. I've got a 2018 12.9-inch iPad Pro, which is my primary computer. And then I also have a 7th generation iPad that I use as sort of in place of what would be like a second monitor. And so I use that for like reference, for looking at my calendar, for looking at my task list during the day. And just if I'm doing any sort of research or looking things up, I'll often pull things up on that iPad. And then I use them at my desk. They're in stands up off the desk. I've got an external keyboard and mouse that I use with them. That's the primary use for them. I do use them in tablet mode occasionally. But one of the things that attracted me to the iPad initially, well, there were a couple of things. One was the extreme portability. I always liked smaller laptops. I was a big fan of the 11-inch MacBook Air when that was out. So I really liked the portability, the lightness. It really can't be beat. For our kids, 5 of our 9 kids are adopted and have special needs, and so we are no strangers to doctor's appointments and therapy sessions and specialists and everything. And until fairly recently, it's not even the case now, but not every doctor's office has Wi-Fi that you can use. So having a cellular option was really attractive to me for that. And then just from a usability standpoint, I really enjoy kind of solving puzzles and putting pieces together and trying to figure things out. So where some people in the earlier years of the iPad saw the limitations of iOS sort of limiting and hampering in what they wanted to do, I kind of saw it as a challenge to try to figure out, okay, I know there's got to be a way to get this done. So how do I do this? What can I chain together to get this done? And I found most of the time, there has been a way to get everything done, at least to an acceptable degree on the iPad. And nowadays it's just about everything. There are only a handful of things that it's really challenging to do. But yeah, I've enjoyed that process of just kind of toying with things and figuring stuff out.
Speaking a bit about having 2 iPads and how you use them, because that's something I haven't heard from a lot of people. A lot of people have what they call the multi-pad lifestyle, and that means 2 iPads set up exactly the same, or one set up just for one purpose that you use in one room and another for the other room. But something I used to do at my last job was have 2 iPads, and one, as you said, was like a reference monitor, and I had this little keyboard that I could hot swap between the two, so I could just like be typing between the two. How do you manage input? Do you have like a keyboard that swaps between them? Do you have 2 sets of mice to use for input, or how does that all work?
No, I use a Keychron K2 Bluetooth mechanical keyboard, so it pairs up to 3 devices, so I can toggle back and forth between the iPads pretty quickly with that. And then the mouse that I use is the Logitech MX Master 3. So that will also pair with 3 devices. So I can flip it over, hit a button on the bottom, and be up and running on the other iPad pretty quickly. But honestly, so I can do that when I need to, but honestly, most of the time, because it's within arm's reach, I'll just reach up and tap the screen. And it's in that way, it's preferable to me to when I used to use a secondary monitor on the Mac, because I've got a fully functioning computer right there that I can reach up and touch and manipulate, and I can move stuff around the screen when I need to, and I don't have to go through that dance of, switching my keyboard over there every single time that I want to type on there. Sometimes I do, but I often don't do it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, back in the day, I would use the Logi-based charging stands and have them like identical iPads on those charging stands. It was just such a clean setup, and we've lost that a little bit now with the current generation, but we have new advantages, such as the Magic Keyboard and all that.
Right. Yeah, I don't really worry about charging them during the day too much, because the battery, I basically charge them overnight and then just run them during the day. And
yeah,
I can't remember the last time that I ran out of battery in the course of a single day.
That's really great, because I sometimes have issues, because if it's in a bright room, I like to have the brightness cranked to max, and that really does hit the battery pretty hard.
Yeah, that will for sure. But yeah, I tend to keep the brightness down just a little bit. So I and working inside from home, I don't usually work in direct sunlight or anything like that. So that's typically not much of an issue for battery drain for me.
What kind of stuff are you referencing? Are you like doing input on one like spreadsheet while referencing a different spreadsheet for different data points, or what are you using the reference screen for?
Yeah, I will sometimes pull up a second spreadsheet on the smaller iPad and look at that. Sometimes I'll pull up information from like our bank account online. If I'm doing some bookkeeping entry, I'll need to have that referenced over there, and I've already got sometimes I've already got 2 windows open on the big iPad, so I need a third space, and slide over just doesn't quite work for that. And then other times, like I said, I'll often just have my task list open for the day so that I can see that as I'm going through, and then I can see what I'm supposed to be doing as I'm getting work done on the bigger iPad, because I prefer to work on the bigger screen. I find that it's just easier to manage multiple windows and apps and everything going back and forth, and it's a good way to keep my calendar up there. Sometimes I'll pop messages open on there if somebody is messaging back and forth, especially if it's something that I don't really need to respond to, but I can follow conversations as they're coming in. So I'll sometimes do that. But and like you mentioned, some people have iPads for very specific reasons, like they have a reading iPad and a work iPad, and I don't do it that way. I don't have them set up exactly the same, but I've got many of the same apps on there, even down to some of the audio and video editing apps that I use. I've got them on both, even though I tend to use them only on the big iPad.
Yeah.
I might as well have them on the smaller iPad in case I need them for something. And then that way I have access to pretty much everything I would need to have access to on both iPads, because of iCloud Drive and other cloud services that just do such a good job of syncing things. It just makes sense to have it there. Even though I use them for different purposes, I can just pick up whichever one I need to at a time and be able to use that.
Right. Yeah. So can you speak a little bit about the nonprofit you work at and the kind of work you're able to accomplish there?
Sure. Like I said, the nonprofit that I work for is called the Crook Orphan Ministry. It's been around for a little over 20 years. My in-laws founded it in the late 90s. We incorporated in 2001. Our primary work is to work with adoption agencies to advocate for what are called waiting children. These are kids who are difficult to place with adoptive families for whatever reason, whether it's a diagnosed medical need or special need of some sort, or the child's age, because often a child over the age of about 2 or 3 is generally considered undesirable for adoption, so they're harder to place, or kids who are in a sibling group who have been orphaned and need to be adopted because it's harder to place them all together than it is to place one child by himself. So we work with agencies to advocate for them. As of today, we've got over 1,000 orphans on our website that we're actively trying to find families for, and doing what we can to get their stories out there in the hopes of connecting them with families and connecting those families with the agencies that can then proceed through the adoption process. So we enjoy being able to see these kids come home and come along the families during the adoption process there. So
that's really cool. And is it centralized around a certain location, or is it across the 50 states, or just kind of in your local area?
No, we are based here in southwestern Ohio, but we're not limited. We have families that have adopted through us that are all over the country, and really it depends on the adoption agencies that we work with as to where families are located and where they can adopt. But there's no reason we can't work with any family in the U.S. Families in other countries, that gets trickier because it depends on whether the agency that we're working with is licensed to work in that country, and typically the answer is no.
Right.
Typically the agencies we work with are only licensed here in the U.S., so that would be the limiting factor in that. But the children on our site that we advocate for are from all over the world, from Africa, South America, Asia, Europe. So a lot of kids here in the U.S., and a lot of those kids here in the U.S. have been adopted before, and those adoptions are now being dissolved. And so they're looking for a second adoptive family for those kids.
Okay. So onto the work you do at the nonprofit. What are some of the core apps you use to get your work done? And I guess you can kind of go through just briefly. We'll dive deeper in a little bit here.
My role has me kind of filling whatever hole needs to be filled. Like my responsibilities have kind of expanded over the years, so I've collected more and more apps and things that I need to use to get my work done than I had when I started 13 years ago. But generally, just to kind of run things down quickly, for like communication-based apps, I've got email and Spark and Preside. I use those 2 apps together. Obviously, Slack and Messages are big for that. For managing social media and outreach stuff, I use MailChimp. I think we want to talk about that a little bit later, but
yeah.
I use MailChimp mainly through Safari, not through the app. And then for social media management, most of that happens through Facebook's Business Suite app, because that actually connects our Facebook and Instagram accounts into one app that I can use to manage to post things and to reply to people and manage it through there.
And it's a decent iPad app, or what's kind of the state of it?
It's okay. I mean, it's a Facebook app. It's not as full. It doesn't have the ads or anything that the Facebook app has, but every once in a while they'll issue an update where that app will only work in portrait mode, and you're just going to have to wait around for a few weeks for them to get back around to fixing that so that it will actually rotate back to landscape mode and use it. So
does your stand work in portrait? Is that something you're able to actually accommodate?
It doesn't rotate, but I can pick up the iPad and rotate it and set it back down in the stand in portrait mode. So it's when that happens, it's only a minor annoyance, but I wish they would just keep that working in landscape mode. But at least there is an app for that, and they still don't have an Instagram app, so I guess I can't complain too much about that.
Yeah, and the Facebook properties are the core. Like Twitter is less of an important medium for your organization.
Yeah, we have a Twitter account, but there really isn't much there. We get far more engagement on Facebook and Instagram for what we do.
Yeah, it seems like a much better fit.
Yeah, I think so too. I keep posting to Twitter just so that there is an actual history there, and we do get some comments on Twitter occasionally, but most of it is through Facebook and Instagram, yeah.
So for text type stuff, you use Drafts and Bear. Like, how do you decide what goes where?
Bear is basically my long-term note storage. So if I have a note that I know that I want to keep and reference later, I will put it in Bear. And sometimes I'll start things right there in Bear. It has really good support for shortcuts. It has text expander support, which is a rarity these days. Because it's plain text, it's actually pretty easy to automate. I've got a shortcut that runs whenever I do a new podcast that will actually build out the structure of the note in Bear. They, for a while in Bear, have had the ability to do wiki-style links from one note to another. And then a few months back, they introduced the ability to do wiki-style links to section headings within a single note. So what I do when I've got a longer note, whether, like I said, for the podcast, for example, if I'm putting the show notes together, is I will put together a table of contents at the top. And then because it's all plain text, I know what the heading titles are going to be further down in the document as the shortcut runs. And so it'll just automatically put those at the beginning of the note. So I've got a table of contents at the top of the note in Bear that's clickable, so I can navigate down to the different sections of the note and do it that way. So I find that to be extremely helpful.
Yeah.
I used to be an Evernote user back in the day. I think
me too. I loved
like
the crap out of that application, and then I don't know, over the years it just became less and less desirable.
I know, and I've gone back to it a couple times over the past couple of years, thinking, this is really good for certain things, and it's just, even with the new design that they came out with late last year, it just doesn't work as well. It's slower. It's even though you can attach files to it, it has a really strange annotation engine on the iPad that doesn't work well doesn't take advantage, I should say, of the Apple Pencil or anything like that. So it ends up just being a frustration, and it has I don't know, the automation has always been somewhat limited that you can do on device on the iPad, and it's still that way. And Bear is just so much better at all of that even though I can't collaborate with other people or anything like that in Bear, it's so much better for on-device work. And most of the things that I do, I don't need to collaborate with other people in terms of working on the same notes. So I like the fact that Bear will export really nice-looking PDFs of notes that I need to share with other people, like meeting note summaries and things like that. And then I find that works really well at this point.
So Keep It is also another tool you use, and you can put text in there, but do you have a different purpose for that? Is that kind of like your file management kind of receipt holder, or like document scanning storage place, or what is that for?
I use it for a very specific and kind of limited set of documents. Basically, it's for things that I need to reference quickly or often. So things like manuals for things, I'll put in Keep It because it'll OCR PDFs as you put them in there. One of the things that I do as well is that when adoption agencies send us information about children to list and to advocate for, they will, if they're allowed to by the country's requirements, they'll send us a series of pictures of that child. So they'll send one picture, 5 pictures, whatever. And there are times when I need to go back and access those original pictures, whether I'm putting together the show art for a podcast episode or the chapter artwork for a podcast episode, or just advocating for the child via whatever, whether it's MailChimp or social media. And sometimes tracking those down is a little tricky in email. Email search has been a little bit of a headache, and I'll get to that a little later, I think. But sometimes also with that, the agency will, after they've sent us the initial batch of information, a few months later, or sometimes even a year later, they'll send us more, and we've got updated photos, and so it can take a little while to sort through those email threads and find the picture that I want. So I put together a shortcut where I will take all of the photos that were sent of a particular child, put them in a stack in Yoink, and then run the shortcut on that. And the shortcut asks for the child's name and for the ID number that we assign internally for the child. And then it'll go into Keep It, into a particular folder where I save these photos, and it'll search for other files that are named with that same name and ID number. And it'll count them, and then it will assign the proper number after that. So if it finds 4 files that already start with that name, it'll append the number 5 to the first one in the stack from Yoink, and then just add them all to that file, so that when I need to find them later on, I just go into Keep It and I search for them, and all of the photos are there. And I've got the whole stack of original photos. I search for the ID number, it filters it down, and I can see, okay, I've got 6 photos I need to choose from here. Let me just quickly tab through each, tap on each one and see what they look like and which one I want to use at this point. So that's primarily what I use Keep It for, stuff like that.
Okay. You mentioned email. So not only Spark, but also Preside, which I had not heard of Preside until you mentioned it in your notes prior to this interview. And I looked it up, and it looks kind of like an interesting app. And I love that when you're setting up the app, it's got a little bit of snark. It still has Mobile Me and Hotmail. And it asks you... maybe you want to use iCloud, something like that. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, it's kind of a blast from the past. I had not heard of it until I discovered it last year. There was a blog post by somebody named Andrew Canyon. I hope I'm saying his last name correctly. I forget how I came across this, but he was sharing that he set up Preside to mirror some of the functionality of the Hey email service that just came out.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I've never heard of Preside. I thought I had tried all of the email apps, because what I had wanted for years for an email app was I really wanted one to let me say, okay, take my entire backlog of emails, download it to my device, and let me search those files. Because for the nonprofit, I've got 13 years worth of emails at this point and almost 100,000 messages in my archive. And because we started before the days of G Suite and stuff like that, we just have, regular IMAP email server. The problem is if I try to search for, text that I know is in an email somewhere in Spark, it'll time out after a certain amount of time. It'll just say, I'm sorry, I can't find anything.
It's a hard problem to solve.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'm not blaming Spark. I think that that's an issue with the email server more than it is with the app. But I suspect that this model of your email only resides in the cloud and you have to access it that way came from how limited storage space was on iOS devices in the early years. I mean, how long did we have 16 gigabyte iPhones that couldn't store anything on?
Yeah, the same problem exists in the local client. Search on the local client is just not great, the Apple Mail app.
Yeah, no, it's really not. And it's really inconsistent too. It's not just that it won't find things. It's not reliable. So I had given up ever finding anything. I had tried, Newton. I used Newton back when it was called Cloud Magic. I tried, Spark. I used Airmail for a while until I ran into some weird bugs with that have never been resolved. And I tried, let me think what else I've tried. Spike and Bluemail and all kinds of things. I used Dispatch for a long time until that app went away, but its search was never great either. And so I looked up Preside, and it claimed to allow you to do this. And I thought, okay, I've got to take a look at this. And sure enough, it does. You can tell it in the settings to download and index your entire archive of email for your accounts. And it does it, and its search is phenomenal. It'll find, I can search for text and it'll find an email from 10 years ago and text that was in the quoted body of the message, not just in the actual message from the person. So it's incredibly fast. And
out of curiosity, have you looked how big your Preside app is in your settings of just how much email is on there?
I think it's only only like 5 or 6 gigabytes, but that's because I don't have it downloading all of the old attachments. I think it downloads the attachments now as they come in, but it hasn't downloaded the full 13 years worth of email attachments. That would be kind of a lot, but even that much text just to sort through and index, and it takes a while for it to run all of that in the background, to download everything and index it properly. But man, once it does, it works really, really well for that. And I've tried using that app as my go-to everyday email client, but it just doesn't quite work. It has some weird things that it does with email attachments when you're coming in and you're trying to work with them. And it has limited keyboard shortcuts. So it's just not quite ideal for that. You can't even email groups. If you have groups set up in your contacts, it won't see those for some reason. You can email individuals just fine, but you can't, email to a group like you can in most other email apps. And there's no automation. There's no tie-in with shortcuts. There's no URL scheme that I could find. There's nothing like that. So
it's your tool for search. Like I like it. Just a purpose-built app for just search is what you've used it for. Yeah. And the name's perfect. Preside. It presides on your iPad.
Yeah, it does. It really manages it well. It does not look particularly pretty when you open it up by default. It's kind of an austere, classic, old school look to it. But
it felt like I was going back half a decade or so.
Exactly. But I spent some time looking at it, and you can actually tweak the colors and everything of the setup to be pretty much anything you want. So I've got a nice, really dark gray and orange theme constructed in Preside. So it's not as jarring to look at as it was when I first opened the app. So, but it gets the job done for search. So I'm glad to have that tool in my toolbox here.
Is it a one-time purchase, or how's that one done?
I think it's free to download, and then I think if you want to subscribe to the pro features, which I did because, I'm figuring if I'm downloading that many messages, I want it to manage that well. I think it's like $25 a year. So it's really, for compared to the other email apps out there, it's kind of a lot, but it's really not much for what it does.
Yeah. So Spark is your go-to live in and live out email client. It's the one you go to for everything else. What about Spark made you go to that versus the other options out there?
I think the biggest thing for me is that it's the most stable of all the email apps that I've tried. I used Airmail for a while, and I know some people have had trouble with Airmail telling you that it has sent a message when it really hasn't sent a message, which is an issue. I've had it go the other way, and I have this weird bug that with the account for the nonprofit, every once in a while I'll send a message and it will send 2, 3, 4 copies of the same message to the same recipients, and that is not great. And so the
not
last
very
time
professional. No.
No, the last time that happened, I was emailing our accountant, and I hit send on the email in Airmail, and it went, and then a few seconds later I heard the whoosh sound again, and it went off a third time before I could force quit the app. And then so I emailed him back and just said, I'm sorry, my email app occasionally sends multiple copies of the same email. I'm sorry you got caught up in that. And he wrote back and said, okay, that makes sense. I thought you were just really insistent about this point. I thought, no, that's not what I was trying to communicate. So I will occasionally pop back in and try Airmail again, but it doesn't work. And it doesn't search great for me, for my needs. And so Spark is just far more stable. And Airmail will sometimes just randomly quit. If I'm in the middle of an email draft and I switch away, sometimes I'll come back and the email draft is just gone. And Spark does a much better job of managing all of that stuff and not crashing, not doing that. It has a functional URL scheme. I wish it would do a couple more things than it does, but it's there and it works, and I can automate some things for that. It has some keyboard shortcuts, not as many as Airmail, but it has enough to make processing email pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only app that I know of other than Apple's own mail app that actually supports multi-window on the iPad. So it's not something that I use often, but I use it often enough that I like knowing that I can pull up an email for reference as I'm writing a new email or searching for something. So that does come in handy.
Yeah, that's a very useful thing. And before Apple Mail app did that, it's like, oh, this is just the compose window is stuck here. I can't look at the other one. And it's something you can end up doing quite a bit depending on the kind of emails you write. And Spark's the only one that I've found that does the HTML signatures, which is something I've needed in the past as a thing, which not many clients do that. And that's one that it does pretty well.
Yeah. I didn't know that because I just use a plain text signature for everything.
Yeah.
So I'd never even attempted an HTML signature, but it's good to know. I'm not surprised that it does that because they have their bases pretty well covered with that app. They've done a good, solid job with that.
Yeah, my search for HTML5 signatures, I must have tried every email app, and Spark was like the only one that did. It's like, seriously? Okay, this is like something pretty common, I would think, in the business world. But yeah.
Yeah, I think I get quite a lot of emails from people with, HTML or embedded images and things like that. So yeah.
Do you end up using the Spark collaborative email at all? Is that something, or is it all you as far as dealing with that?
No, I use it. I use it some with my father-in-law in particular. He also uses Spark most of the time, and so we have collaborated there. And it's really handy to be able to do that, to share an email like that, and to have a little discussion about, okay, how do we respond to this? Do we respond to this? Do we think this is junk? Because as most people do, we get lots of junk mail that sometimes seems legitimate at first glance. So we can have those discussions there with because that doesn't necessitate a whole new email thread. It doesn't really require a text message back and forth, and so it's really nice to be able to have that. So we do make use of that.
Yeah. So Trello is another app you mentioned in kind of your rundown notes. This is for project management, or what do you use this for?
It is for project management. I ended up using it for one specific thing. It's one of those apps that I had heard about for years and thought, that sounds really cool. I don't have a use case for it. There's no way that I could actually manage my tasks in a Kanban style like that. That's just not, it's not how my brain works, and it's not how my job works. I need just a checklist sort of app for that.
Yeah.
So
Isn't it frustrating when there's like cool apps that's like, I wish I had a reason for that. OmniPlan's that for me. It's like, I wish I had a reason to use OmniPlan. Yeah.
Agenda is that for me. I keep looking at it and thinking that looks great. It's got so many great features, but it just does not work with what I need to do.
Right.
So I've tried to shoehorn it in there, but it doesn't work. So I had Trello in the back of my mind for years, just as an option here. And then one of the things that we do is we've got a volunteer who is our main point of contact with the adoption agencies that we work with. And so one of the things we've got to make sure we manage well is we want to make sure that the children that we're advocating for and putting on our website and saying are available for adoption are actually available for adoption, and that we've got the right contact information for the agencies, because each of the children listed on our site gets their own dedicated page, and people that submit an inquiry about that child, that email goes directly to the adoption agency. It goes to us and the agency. So we need to make sure we've got all the correct contact information and all that. So twice a year she goes through the agencies that we have and just emails them and asks them to review all of the information that we have. And for a while, we were trying to manage this in a shared spreadsheet. I think it started out as an Excel sheet and might have moved over to Google Sheets at some point, but a spreadsheet is particularly ill-suited for tracking this kind of stuff. So we had a column for like, hey, the last time I contacted this agency was this, and she would put notes there, and it kind of sort of worked, but it never clicked. And so I took a look at it and said, okay, let's set up a Trello board here, and let's just say, okay, here's the list of agencies to contact, and then we've got a column for contacted once, contacted twice, and then if she doesn't get a response after 2 tries, then I step in and contact them, and then we've got a column at the end for done for that particular period. And so we've got that, and that has worked so well to manage that kind of thing, because it's perfect for that kind of, flowing through the steps of a project like that and tracking multiple pieces moving through the same, assembly line, I guess, for lack of a better term. But it works really well for her. It works really well for me to be able to pop in and see that. And then I've tied that, I think through Zapier, but it might have been through IFTTT. I can't remember which one. So that any updates to any of the lists or cards in that Trello board get piped into a Slack channel. So I can see when she's working and what's going on without even having to open Trello, because the Slack notifications will just pop up. And so if she puts a comment in there or has a question for me about something that she puts in the comment of the Trello card, I can go in, like I know that comment is there waiting for me, so I go in and do that. And that we've been using it that way for several years now, and it's just fantastic for this kind of work.
And the individual kids will be listed under the agency card. Is that right?
No, I've actually we started using Airtable last year to manage the children that we list from the agencies, and so I have set up on our website private pages for the agencies to go in and be able to view an embedded Airtable view of just their kids on the site.
Okay.
So her email to them contains a link to that, so that the agency goes to our site, logs in. Once they log in with their account, then they can see all their information there and let us know if anything needs to be updated. So she has sort of boilerplate text that she uses for that, but this allows us to track where the agencies are in the process and whether they're responding. If there's something unusual going on, we can track that there too. So that's been working really well for us.
That's awesome. Yeah, and Trello is one of those apps that feels like, oh, this is so at home on the iPad. These big cards that you drag around. It's like...
Yeah, there's nothing like actually picking up the card and moving it to another section and dropping it. It's just, I think it's a more natural, like you said, a more natural iPad app in some ways than it is even a Mac or a web app.
Totally, yeah. So Airtable, I've tried to find a use for this. I really don't have one for my needs, but you've found a really good use of it. Like, how did you set this up? They're very flexible kind of database system. And was this all done on the iPad, setting this up and configuring this?
Yeah, I set this all up on the iPad. I don't think this would have been possible for me to do on the iPad before iPad OS 13 with the new Safari that came in. I had been using Airtable for years, for almost a decade now, to manage our kids' doctor's appointments and everything, because when our kids were younger and we only had a couple, I could keep track of everything in my head. But it quickly got to the point, we've been married 13 years now, have 9 kids, and the way things kind of grew exponentially earlier on, I could not keep up with that in my head. And so I devised I set up an Airtable database for my wife and me to share, where we could see the kids' appointments history and, chart their height and weight over time and have links to notes about the appointments and all that. So I knew about Airtable.
What's this visually look like for those that are trying to visualize what this app looks like? Because you can set this up to look different. Like a database is very open-ended.
Yeah.
Like, what's this visually look like?
If you go to the web interface, that's the one that I'm most familiar with. The iPad and iPhone app is strange. They've done some weird things with the way that looks. It's sort of like a spreadsheet on the iPad. Like the native iPad app looks kind of like a spreadsheet, but with gaps between the rows. So it's not like you can't see cells like you would see in a spreadsheet. Like if you open up a numbers file or an Excel file and you've got, a grid of cells next to each other, it doesn't look like that on the iPad and iPhone app. But if you go into the web view, online, that's the default view for Airtable. It's basically like the way that it was described to me is that you can think of a spreadsheet as a book. You can have chapters in a book. You can have different sheets for a spreadsheet, and you can have a bunch of information there. But a database is more like a library. So you can have specific tables like within that, and you can connect more like larger bits of information together back and forth. So in some ways, a database is like a super spreadsheet, if you will, in some ways. But it also allows you to create specific views and ways of viewing and accessing and even adding the data in there. So like I said, if you go and open up a free Airtable account and log in online, the first view you're going to see is going to look very much like a very slim spreadsheet. Unlike Excel that gives you infinite cells seemingly and to the right and to the bottom, I think Airtable defaults to just like 3 or 4 columns and I don't know, maybe 20 or 50 rows, something like that. I don't remember what the default is there, but it looks kind of like a spreadsheet, but you've got different kinds of fields that you can put in there. And so we had actually been managing the children that we advocate for in a shared Google Sheet for a while. And that was working pretty well until last summer. I discovered that we were getting some data corruption in the spreadsheet, which was not pleasant to find out. I found some cells that had been improperly copied and pasted over some other cells in there. So some of the kids' names and ID numbers were incorrect. And then the really strange thing was that some of the ID numbers, which should have been just a straight 4-digit integer, ended up being bizarre decimals. So instead of 4035, it was 4034.9874394, and it would just go on and on and on. I thought, what in the world is happening? Like I can understand, copying and pasting something incorrectly, but where is it getting this weird, extended decimal that never should have been there? So at that point, I realized I think we're stretching this too much. And I mean, honestly, I should have moved us to a database years prior because we got to the point where we were trying to manage the children in one spreadsheet, the agencies in another, and the families in another. And we really needed all of those to tie together. So I needed a way to tie 3 spreadsheets together, which is exactly the kind of thing that a database is designed for. So last year, we looked at this and I set up an Airtable database for us that within that database, I can track, all of the children that we advocate for and the families and the agencies that we have and the podcast episodes, and I can track our volunteers, and I can tie all of this together. So, if there's a child who is on our website, has also been featured on the podcast, I can, just by opening up that child's record, I can access the podcast episode, I can access the agency that listed that child with us. I can find all that information just from one single record in the Airtable database, which has been immensely helpful to have all of that, instead of having it spread over several different spreadsheets and never sure if it's exactly saving things correctly. I mean, we are not even using, I forget what the limit is in the Airtable database, and I don't want to go try to track that down now because I'm afraid if I exit the app, I'm going to lose the audio and on the chat or my recording.
Yeah.
But I think you get 50,000 records per database. And so in our main database right now, I think we have just over 5,000 records. So we're not even coming close to the limit of what a database is meant to handle data-wise.
Right.
And it's been such a huge thing for us to be able to use that.
Did you look in the FileMaker, or was the notion of Airtable being a free service really appealing for that from that angle?
We ended up not being able to use the free service on Airtable. We had to pay for it because I think the free one gives you like 1,200 records or something. Like, it's a limited amount. It's enough to try it out and see if it's going to work.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's a pretty generous free tier, and you get all of the, like, you can use the API, you can use the web automation and stuff in the free account. So there's no limit on that. It's just that the paid accounts give you far more. Give you the ability to make a far larger database than the free account does. And I did look at FileMaker, but I don't have much experience with the databases. My experience prior to this was Bento way back in the day.
Oh yeah,
which I loved, and I kept hoping that something like that would come out again, but there's nothing out there like that. So I looked at FileMaker, and I just thought it seemed like overkill and more expensive than was probably worth it for us for our data needs. And the other option that I looked at was actually Tapforms. That's an iOS and Mac database app.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, and I tried using that, and I couldn't ever quite get it to work properly for me. And I don't know if I was setting something up incorrectly, but ultimately Airtable ended up being the better option for us because of things like being able to embed specific views of our database on pages of our website and have that kind of flexibility. I wouldn't have been able to do that with Tapforms for sure, and probably I would have been able to do that with FileMaker, but I could never quite piece together whether I'd be running the file server somewhere and responsible for that, and I really didn't want that bit of overhead because I don't really know what I'm doing when it comes to that. So I really wanted something that would be a little bit more accessible and flexible, and Airtable definitely fits that bill for us.
Do you use the shortcuts integration at all, using that API?
No, I don't. I actually use it for, strangely enough, just for a personal bit. I've got a shortcut that'll run when one of our kids has an upcoming doctor's appointment that'll add stuff to that. But I don't use any of the shortcuts for the database for the Shepherd's Crook. I use the way that it's set up is that when you have a paid account through Airtable, you have to pay for each user who has read and write access to the database. So you can add other people in there who have just read-only access, or you can share, like I said, you can embed the database view on a web page and see it there. The way that it's set up is that I'm the only one who can actually make any changes to the database. So I've set up a couple of forms through Airtable that will allow we've got a couple of volunteers who work with us to process the kids as they are sent to us by the agencies and then get them ready to go up on the website and then actually post them on the website. And so when one of our first volunteer in that bit, she gets the email, she enters all the information for the kids into a form that I've set up, crops all the pictures and resizes them so that they're ready for the website. And then she inputs all that into the form in Airtable, and then that goes into a specific view on Airtable. The main view that we work from, you can set up all kinds of conditions for Airtable. This is kind of getting deep in the weeds here, and I might get a little bit lost. But basically, I set up one field in the record for the kids that just says entry verified, and it's a checkbox. And so the master list that we all look at and work from, that's the master record of all the kids that are on the site, that were on the site, that are in process to be adopted, that have been adopted, all of those have that box checked. They only show up in that particular view of the database if they're checked. So I've got a view in the database called My Queue. So I go in there to see the list of kids that I need to process, and those boxes are unchecked. So I go in and I just kind of take the data that she has put in, I verify a couple things about it, and then I complete the entry and check the box, and it goes into the main view. And then that way it's accessible to everybody else. I've thought about possibly automating some of that stuff and taking some of those steps out, but I really like having that extra layer or two of human eyes checking it to make sure that everything is all the way correct before we say, yes, this is ready to be posted on the website. Because invariably with 1,000 kids on the site and over almost 5,000 kids in the database, things will slip past one of us from time to time. And having 2 or 3 of us working on the same data set, we're liable to catch. I mean, just earlier today, this volunteer emailed me and said, the last couple entries you put in there, you used ID numbers that were already used before. Mm-hmm. So I had to go back in and change those. And that wouldn't have been caught if it had been. I mean, that's the kind of thing that might not be caught if we were automating that.
Right.
We've had, an agency send us information about a child that was already on our website, and they'll use a different name for it because they're often assigning, aliases to these kids. And our volunteer who works with the photos will almost always say, I've seen that photo before, and she'll be able to go back and find, and sure enough, that kid was listed with us 9 months ago, and we have that entry, so we can just go back in and update that. And there's no way to automate that kind of checks and balances.
This episode of iPad Pros is sponsored by Spark by Readle. Love your email again with the best personal email client that's revolutionary for teams. Email is something we all have and something many people struggle with. Spark, as you heard Greg speak about earlier, really is the best solution to take control of your inbox on iPad. To me, it is the app that perfectly balances pro user needs with a design approachable to any type of user. Spark intelligently prioritizes your email. It bubbles important messages from real people to the top, helping you find the emails that truly matter. Something I love using are VIPs in Apple's Mail app, but Spark takes this idea and improves upon it greatly by showing you notifications for emails from those people that you actually know. With VIPs, you have to set each one individually, and many people run out of VIP slots. Spark's approach to notifications is exactly what I want from VIPs without the time and effort needed by the built-in app. Spark is littered full of smart features like this. Snooze emails to handle them later when the time is just right. Send later lets you reply to an email late at night instead of that email getting buried in your recipient's mailbox. Instead can be scheduled for a certain time, ensuring they will see it or you don't look too eager to reply right away. Whatever the reason, it's great to have. Another killer feature is their email signatures. I still haven't found any other apps on iPadOS that can do HTML5 email signatures. Beyond that, you can set up multiple signatures and swipe between them depending on who you are corresponding with right there in your composition window. If you're on a team, you can collaborate on emails within Spark. This is something Greg mentioned just a few minutes ago. As a team, you can privately comment on an email, create emails together with a real-time composition editor, and use templates to speed up replies to frequently asked questions. These are just some of the many features that make Spark my email client of choice. It really is the best solution out there for iPad. Learn more at sparkmailapp.com and download the app today for free to see for yourself why Spark is so special. Once again, that's www.sparkmailapp.com. My thanks to Spark by Readle for sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. Learn more at sparkmailapp.com. So, task management. Things is kind of your go-to app there. Why that over OmniFocus or the other ones out there?
For me, most of that is because I have been using Things for almost a decade at this point, and it was the first dedicated task manager that I tried. I used it without really understanding what getting things done was. I've never actually read the book all the way.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've started it twice and have never actually finished it. So most of my knowledge from that comes from a combination of the famous Inbox Zero Talk that Merlin Mann did.
Yeah.
And then he did years ago, I think it was back in 2012, did a 5-part mini series on getting things done on the Back to Work podcast, and just kind of laid out the basic flow of capturing data, getting your stuff into a trusted system and working off of that. And so, once, as I was processing all that and I was using Things, there was at one point, everything just clicked and I suddenly understood what the areas of responsibility were. I understood how to work with projects and the someday list and the today list and the inbox, all of that just clicked. And so I've been using that and kind of, in some ways, letting that app kind of shape the way that I work with tasks and manage things, because no app will work, whether it's task management or email, no app works exactly the same way that everybody's brain processes everything. So to a certain extent, you've got to find what works mostly for you and then kind of adapt to that app, at least to a degree. So because I got into that, and then with the release of Things 3, especially a couple years ago, that was just, everybody talks about the visual side of it, but it's never given me any trouble. It's rock solid. Its sync is incredibly fast. It's stable. It's always one of the first apps to introduce new features when a new version of iPadOS comes out or iOS comes out. They're at this point, at least, once they release Things 3, they're one of the first apps to introduce that. So multi-window support, they've got great shortcut support, they have a URL scheme for getting to things. So I just haven't felt the need to change anything. That's not to say that I haven't kicked the tires on a couple of other apps, because I have. I've tried OmniFocus and To Do and Todoist, and I just keep coming back to things. It's the way that my brain processes things right now, and because it works so well and is so solid, and in some ways its flagship feature over the past 2 years or so is the keyboard support for the iPad is just phenomenal. You can navigate and control almost the entire app just from the keyboard, and that makes it faster.
Yeah, I've heard amazing things about that aspect in particular. Yeah.
Yeah. So I find it to be good, and it's an app that scales up and down pretty well. I mean, OmniFocus does not scale down particularly well, and in some ways Todoist doesn't scale up very well. It's a really good app, but my biggest frustration with Todoist is, one, the lack of actual shortcuts integration. It has some, but its concept of project templates is a little wonky. You've got to, the best way to do it is really to export a CSV of the project template and then use that to import a new one, and it doesn't work with shortcuts. And Things itself doesn't actually have a good project template feature for shortcuts or for its URL scheme, but there's a drafts action. One of the things that I use drafts for is processing text of all different kinds. There's an action in the drafts directory called things parser that will let you create a project using the task paper format, and then it'll run that and correctly do that. So I've got shortcuts that will run. I need to create a new project for something and have all of these tasks in that project. That action in drafts will create that project in the proper area of responsibility. It'll create all the tasks under it with the proper dates and notes, everything that I need for that exactly as I would want it to go. So having found that, like I said, I just don't see, I'm not going to rock the boat that's actually working well. But if things ever goes away, I will be in deep trouble because everything is in there. So
right. And I feel the same about OmniFocus. Is what I started with, and I'm very familiar with it. And whatever you start with, it's got a big advantage for being that.
Yeah, and for the most part, for apps like that, if you outgrow it and go beyond what it's capable of, you'll know it, and you'll know that it's time to look for something else.
Yep. So you mentioned shortcuts quite a bit there. What are the ones you use on a regular basis? What have you set up on your iPad?
So one of the ones that I set up, going back to the whole asking for updates from the agencies and everything, I have a shortcut set up that when it's my turn to, if our volunteer has contacted an agency twice and hasn't gotten a response back, which happens because sometimes emails for whatever reason get flagged as spam and set off into a spam filter and people never see it. And because I've been around a little bit longer, my emails tend to get through. I'll reach out to the agency at that point. So I've got a shortcut that I run that will ask me to select the agency from a list. I'll select that. It'll search my contacts. I've got a group in contacts for all of the active agencies that we have. And so I'll enter all of the contact information for each of the people that we know at that agency and tag them with the active agency tag and actually use CardHop for that to manage contacts, because you can't manage groups on the built-in contacts app on iOS. So the shortcut will go in, search through that group for anybody that works at that agency, and it will ask me for the dates that we've previously tried to contact them, and it will pull up an email in Spark addressed to all the people at that agency with the boilerplate text in there, including the dates that that we've already tried to reach out for them, with the links that they need to get to the website. And then there's a spot for me to add a little bit more. So if I know that there's been some recent turnover at the agency or something like that, I can add that in there and I can send that off. But the nuts and bolts of the email, the important pieces, I don't have to look up each time.
Yeah,
I don't have to,
that's super cool.
I don't have to do any of that. Yeah, so that's one that I use quite a bit. I run one similarly for monthly updates for the bookkeeping work that I do. One of the things we do for all in-process families, we send them an update every month about what donations have come in for their kid's account, what payments have gone out from their child's account, and the current balance. And so I actually track those in an Airtable database as well. So I update that database, the tables for each of those kids each month. And then I have those, I have links to those, but they're password protected. So I have a shortcut that goes in. I keep all that information in data jar. And so I've got a shortcut that will go in and say, okay, I'm sending all of the information for these kids this month. It'll ask me for to choose the child. And it'll go into data jar, pull up each kid one at a time, ask me for the current final balance of the account. And then it'll construct an email with all of the relevant information for that child's account, the link to their to their full history in Airtable, the password for it, and their current balance, and it'll format that email and get it ready to send. So again, I don't have to go look that stuff up. I used to have to type all of the donation information and the transaction information into the email. That's how I did it for years when I first started. And that got me into Text Expander and everything. But this is way easier even than Text Expander for that, because it's all just done in one shot there. I've got one for personal use for our kids, for managing prescriptions and stuff, that if I need to refill a prescription or if I need to request a refill or go pick up a refill, I've got shortcuts for those that, again, I keep that information in data jar. It goes in, asks me which kids I need to do something with. I select the kids. It'll bring up the list of medications that they have, and then I can say, I need to go pick up this, this medication and this medication. When do you want to do that? I want to do it on Thursday this week, and it'll add that to things, and it'll format the task, say pick up, this medication for this child on Thursday, and tag it with an errand and add it to things. So that's something that I use almost every single week.
Yeah,
so
very cool. So with fundraising, you mentioned each kid has kind of their own account. How's that aspect of the nonprofit work? Do you guys use a certain service for that? Is MailChimp integrating with that, or what's the process for all that?
Yeah, we can accept donations either via check at our post office box or online. And then for our bookkeeping software, we use an online service called Aplos. It's actually specifically designed for nonprofits and churches. For the first few years that I did the bookkeeping, we used QuickBooks Nonprofit. And for a while, I had a netbook that I was running it on. Then I moved to using a virtual machine on my Mac to run that. But QuickBooks for Nonprofit was always a little challenging to work with, because as I understood it, and it certainly seemed this way to me, it was basically the regular version of QuickBooks with just a thin layer of nonprofit vocabulary placed on top of it. So sometimes
right.
getting the right reports out was a little challenging. So I think we moved to Aplos. It's probably been 6 or 7 years ago at this point that we moved to this web-based solution here. And there were definitely times before iPad OS 13 and especially the ability to use an external mouse, where working with it on the web was a little challenging on the iPad. But it works really well for us. So that's where we track everything. So I run all of the reports there. And then again, I haven't figured out a way yet to automate this process, or to see if there's a way to let people view to create sort of a web view from this bookkeeping service that people could potentially log into. The volume is low enough at this point that I can do that manually at this point, especially because I go through it once a month and update that.
Yeah.
If I were doing it, every quarter or 6 months or so, that would be a little bit more challenging. But doing it regularly once a month, every few weeks, it really hasn't been too onerous at all to do it that way.
Okay. And in your notes to me, you mentioned scanning documents, digitizing documents.
Yeah.
Are you using a certain app for this? Do you have a physical scanner that you're using that interfaces with the web, or what's that look like?
Yeah, I primarily at this point actually use a physical scanner. For a while, I hadn't. I used an old Fujitsu ScanSnap back when I used a Mac full time, and that was great because I came across a blog post, I think it was by Brooks Duncan, that showed that you could create different profiles to save. You want to scan a whole stack of one-sided, one-page PDFs. So you can just set up a shortcut for that and just run that. And there was a way to integrate that with Alfred on the Mac and get it to run all that just by typing a command into Alfred. And so that worked really well.
Yeah, I love my ScanSnap. During my college days, I had one and used it quite a bit with my old MacBook Pro.
They're phenomenal. They really are.
Yeah. I wish iPad OS would interface with them. It's one thing they still don't really, you can't talk directly to a scanner, I don't think.
I know. No, as far as I know, you can't. I picked up a little Doxy scanner a couple years ago because this was the one glaring hole in my workflow. One of the biggest things that I was frustrated with when I moved to using the iPad all the time is that I couldn't use the ScanSnap. And, you could buy the big iX 500 or whatever it is for like $500 and work with that. But I thought, I don't really want that on my desk all the time, because I do have physical paper that I need to scan on a somewhat regular basis, but it's not something that I do all day, every day. And so that just seemed like a bit of overkill for that. So for a while I was using Scanner Pro, which works really, really well. But scanning multiple page documents or two-sided documents gets a little, it takes time, because you've got to flip the page over and position the camera and let the camera take the picture. And sometimes the camera doesn't take the picture, and you've got to turn I found that if you turn it to manual and then turn it back to auto, it'll sometimes jog it back into working. And so that just became kind of onerous. So I kept my eyes open for something and came across a Doxy scanner that's claimed to work with the iPad a couple years ago. So I tried that, and you've got to use the Doxy app, and it does that thing that some wireless devices do where it creates its own little ad hoc Wi-Fi network, and you've got to interface with that and connect to that network and work. And it was supposed to let you connect it to your home Wi-Fi and just access it over that. And that worked most of the time, but not all the time. And it was a slow, one-sided app, and I had to use their app to combine all the PDFs and everything. And it was not a great experience. And I had, again, like with email apps, I had kind of given up finding anything that worked. But a few months ago, I came across a scanner. I decided to look one more time and found one that has been working great. It's a Brother scanner. It actually looks just like the ScanSnap S1300. It's got that same form factor. Unlike the ScanSnap, it has a touch screen built into it, and then you can actually create your own shortcuts in the scanner, like in the scanner software on the scanner itself, to do a series of one-sided, one-page PDFs, or a series of two-sided but one-page PDFs, and it will properly separate those out into the different files. But the killer thing for me is that it is wireless, but I don't even use the wireless feature because it's got a USB port on the back. And you can set this to scan directly to the USB flash drive. So I'll scan a series of documents onto the flash drive and then pull that out, pop it into the iPad with an adapter, and I'm good to go. I can just open the Files app. I can rename the files there, drag them where I want them to go, and that has been so much faster. And it has a better scan quality than the Doxy scanner by a long shot. It's very close to what the ScanSnap can do.
What's that one run cost-wise?
The Brother scanner I think was about $240 or $250. So
not bad.
It's in that that mid-range ScanSnap scanner price range.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm trying to remember, do they make thumb drives that like one end is USB-C and the other end is A, and you just plug in either one? Is that a thing yet?
They do that, and I had one for a while, and I don't actually know what happened to it. I don't know. There was one that I had that I erased on my Mac as soon as I got it, and I killed the firmware that allowed it to work with the iPad. So,
because that would be a perfect product for that, right? Because that's probably USB-A thumb drive that is designed for that scanner, right?
Yeah, that would be totally perfect for that. I'm a little wary of inserting and ejecting and pulling out flash drives that rely on those little plastic sliders to hold it in place when you're going back and forth. So I just have one of those little like tiny nub flash drives that I stick in the back of the scanner, so it's not sticking far off the back and it's not going to get caught on something and snapped off in there.
Yeah.
And then I just keep a little USB-A to USB-C adapter on my desk, and I just pop it in there when I need to access files, once or twice a week.
Yeah, it'd be cool if you just plug a cable directly into the scanner, and if there was like internal memory in the scanner, if that would be that'd be a cool thing though as well.
That would be really cool. Or it'd be even better if it would just let me scan to the Files app, hook it up to the iPad, and just let me scan them in there, and I do that. But
iPad OS 15,
but
right?
I'll take this. This is way better than what I had. This is much closer to the whole ScanSnap workflow than I've had since that point. So I'm well satisfied with this because scanning documents is part of my work, but it's not as big a part of my job as it was 10 years ago, because most people don't send you things in the mail anymore.
Yeah, I'm remembering back to when I used Everything Pro Office in college, and they had a built-in scanner interface that was just brilliant. I loved it. And it would be so cool if iPad OS developers could interface with scanners and build their own little interface into these kind of like DevonThink for iPad or Keep It.
Yeah.
That'd be great if they could have their own scanning interface.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know that we're likely to get that, because I think scanning documents is kind of a niche thing at this point. I think Apple they've created a pretty good platform for wireless scanning, or for photo scanning. So they've got that built in, and I think Keep It and other apps tie into that.
They do, yeah. And it works good for just one-off things. But if you're doing like a whole book,
yeah, exactly. Or if you've got payroll reports that are sent to you, and you've got 15 pages of PDFs. You don't want to scan a 15-page document using the camera on your phone or your iPad. It's doable, but it's not great.
Fast.
Yeah, it's not fast, and sometimes the photo quality is not is not good. It's hard to get good lighting on that, and Scanner Pro is done.
Yeah, you might have shadows or something on it.
Yeah, yep. I actually bought a little LED lamp to clip on the back of my desk to shine light down on the papers that as I was scanning them in with Scanner Pro a while back. But the problem with that is that it'll wash out the text if you're not careful.
Yeah.
If you get it too close to that.
Websites are important for nonprofits to kind of share their message, as you would imagine. WordPress is the platform you guys chose for your nonprofit. What's the WordPress scene look like these days on iPad? I know they have an app. I know their website works pretty well. What's the situation there?
Yeah, I have the WordPress app installed, but I don't use it for anything related to the nonprofit. I use it a little bit for looking at stuff on my personal blogs, but not for the nonprofit. When I built this website on WordPress, this was about 5 years ago. I did almost the whole thing on my Mac at that point, putting it all together and all that. And since that point, I've been over the past couple of years, as I've used the iPad 99% of the time for what I do, I found that the WordPress site in Safari works fine. It really does. Before the addition of true trackpad and pointer support last year, it was impossible to work with one of the plugins that we had that allowed you to like drag and drop elements of the web page around and position them where you wanted them. So I was stuck using the Mac for that or just ignoring that. But I've actually been trying to move away from that plugin, not because there's anything wrong with it, but just trying to simplify the structure of the site. So I've been diving a little bit more into CSS and HTML and doing that. And if that's all you're working with, you can easily do that on the iPad. You can open up the editor and move those blocks around in the WordPress editor in Safari. I find that it's fine. Every once in a while, you run into one of those weird issues that you do in any web app where scrolling doesn't seem to work properly in a field, and you've got to move the pointer to a different part of the page and try scrolling, or sometimes reach up and tap the page and get it to kind of jog the scrolling back into working properly. But aside from that, it has really worked quite well.
That's really good to hear. And as you're updating sites, you're working in the code itself, or you using the rich text view, or?
Typically, for a while I was using the rich text view, but over time I've been trying to do more and more in the direct code so that I can see what's going on. And I'm just curious about, HTML and CSS, and I didn't really know how to do any of that 5 years ago when I started. So I've kind of learned enough to get the website up and functional a few years ago, and I've just been kind of chipping away at pieces of it here and there as we've got, either problems that need to be addressed or just things that I think I would really like to be able to do this. How do I do that? And I'll search and find that. And I have not been following best practices. I've been doing a lot of coding in the web browser, which is really dangerous and not great. So I've moved all of those important pages off into text files on the iPad that I typically use Textastic to open and work with them there. So I'll make changes there, copy them out, paste in, replace the entire page of code on the website, and then refresh the page and make sure that it works. And if I have any changes to make, I'll make it in. I'm trying to train myself to work in the text file and make the changes there, and then copy those over to the website and not the other way around. So yeah.
So I'd imagine you work with volunteers, as you mentioned earlier. What kind of management do you have to do? Is it just emailing back and forth with people? What's kind of the situation there?
Yeah, it's primarily email. We do have Slack that we use for some things internally, but Slack is one of those things that it works really well for me and for my my in-laws. They're the founders and directors of the Shepherd's Crook, and so we do a lot of communicating back and forth over Slack, which helps because we've all got too much email going on. So having a separate channel that you can kind of filter some of those conversations into works really well. And some of our volunteers have taken well to Slack. Others haven't quite grasped it, and that's fine because I use it also for, like I was saying earlier, with tie-in to Trello. I use it for getting updates, just kind of seeing what's happening. And anytime that a photo is shared to social media advocating for one of these kids, I get a notification in our advocacy channel in Slack so that I can track that and just kind of keep pace with things that way. But a lot of it is just email back and forth, and a lot of my role is not so much informing people what to do, but just giving them the information that they need to be able to do what they need to do at a point. So my sort of the fundamental part of my job is gathering the information that we have, sorting it, organizing it, and then making it accessible to everyone else to have when they need it. So
gotcha. And you mentioned MailChimp earlier. You're just working in Safari to manage all those. I I've had some issues both in their app and in Safari, so I'm not sure what do you find best for that?
Yeah, I have tried their app in the past, admittedly not for probably 2 years or so, because I found their app to be pretty much worthless in terms of creating email campaigns and getting them ready to go. It's pretty good for tracking your statistics afterward and seeing what happens there, but as far as generating emails, I don't think they ever intended their app really to be used for that, from what I can tell. So I've always just done it.
For a while I had the build in Safari, and there was some bug where I couldn't send in Safari, so I had to go to the app to actually hit send on the campaign, but I think they've fixed that since that bug was happening.
Oh, that is so weird. I don't think I ever ran into that. That would be more than a little frustrating, I'm sure, to be unable to send an email from the web like that. But yeah, I just use the Safari interface for that, like with WordPress. And like with WordPress, that's another app that sometimes, the button that I need to click disappears, and I've got to figure out where on the page to scroll, or to reach up and tap and scroll and to get that to reappear. Sometimes I have to resort to changing the zoom level on the page. I have to go into the UI menu, the little 2 A's that are used for the font and style and everything there, and zoom out to 85% or 75%, and then I can get the button to show up that I need to click, and then I can click it and then go back to the right size.
Yeah.
Aside from that, I haven't run into too many issues with MailChimp in the browser.
Okay.
Not for a while anyway. Yeah.
So the Shepherd's Crook podcast, what's the format of the show? What's it all about?
Mostly it's a way for us to get more of these kids' stories out there. We with a growing number of orphans around the world, and the growing number of orphans on our site that we're trying to share their stories, we were looking for different ways to get their stories out there. We can send emails about kids, we can post them on social media, but if anyone has ever tried to find something on Facebook after they've seen it and then close the app and then open it up again, good luck finding it. Even if you go to the person's page, it can sometimes disappear, and all too often emails get lost in the bunch, and honestly, we don't want to flood people's emails. I mean, in a sense, it wouldn't exactly be illegitimate to email everybody and say, look, we've got these are the kids we've added to the website this week, and do that. But that's a lot each week to try to put that together, because there are kids constantly going on the site, coming off the site. So we wanted a different way to shed some light on that. So a couple years ago, I started our podcast. It's basically just me. Most of the time, it's just me talking for 8 or 10 minutes about 3 of the kids that we have on the website, or sometimes it's 5 if there's a sibling group of 3, but I usually pick 3 entries on the site and just briefly share their stories. I don't read the whole write-up that's there. There's usually more that people can read if they follow the links in the show notes for that episode to the kids' pages, and they can go in and read more about them. I don't want it to be about reading right off the website for the whole thing. That wouldn't be good. So I try to highlight things. I try to add some commentary and some context. If we've had kids that have gone through similar things, or know families that have been in similar or had known families that have had kids that have been in similar situations, I'll sometimes mention that. For some of the kids, we are allowed to post videos of them online. So if the kid has a video, particularly of them talking, or if it's a young kid of them babbling and playing and stuff, I will use YouTube DL in the A-Shell app, and I'll download the audio for that kid's video, and I'll put that into the podcast as well, so that you can actually hear. Most weeks, I try to do it so that there's at least one audio clip each week, so that people can hear that and get a sense for what's going on there. And then, keeping it to 8 to 10 minutes, it's manageable. It's really short. It's easy to listen to that. It's not overwhelming. And even with that, if I did 3 kids a week, every week for the whole year, that's 156 kids out of almost 1,100 right now. So it's not even close to the number of kids we have on the site, but it gets more of them out there. It gets more of them, a chance to be talked about. I do occasional interviews on that as well. I've done a series of 4 or 5, I think at this point, talking to representatives from the adoption agencies about the adoption process for particular countries. So we've talked about Colombia, we've talked about the Philippines, we've talked about Bulgaria and Serbia, just what it takes to adopt from these countries. So what are the steps you can expect? What's the time frame you can expect? What kinds of situations are the kids living in typically? Are they in foster families? Are they in orphanages? What kinds of orphanages? So just that kind of thing. So that those are also sprinkled in throughout there in the podcast as well.
Very cool. And what's kind of your recording setup Is Ferrite your go-to app for doing most of that?
It is, yeah. When it's just me, I just record right into Ferrite. I just sit there and I'll talk for a few minutes and record everything there. And I've got a project template set up in there, so I can go ahead and open that up and add the new audio to the project template and have that there. And especially with what they've added over the past couple of years to Ferrite, with being able to insert chapters and chapter artwork and links for the chapters, they're all separated out. So if you have a podcast app that supports chapter artwork and you download one of our podcasts, I started doing this about a year ago, I want to say. If we're allowed to share the photo of the child that I'm talking about, their photo will be the chapter artwork for that section of the podcast, and the link will take you directly to their page on our website for more information. So, but yeah, Ferrite is the one-stop shop for that. I'm toying with an iPad only setup for handling interviews, but I haven't had a chance to test it yet. So far, I've always gone back to the Mac to do that.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a process to do that on iPads. It's definitely
Yes.
possible, but especially with two iPads, it's even easier.
Yeah, I think that's going to solve it for me, honestly, but I haven't had a chance to put that to the test just yet.
Yeah, and you actually have a way of hooking up an XLR microphone to a Lightning iPad, is that right?
I do, yeah. I have the microphone that I'm using is the Samson Q2U, which is effectively the same microphone as the Audio-Technica something.
ATR 2100.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yep. So it has a USB and an XLR connector on the bottom. Mine's the older version, so it has the USB Mini on the bottom, not USB-C. But I bought a USB-C Mini to USB-C cable that goes into the iPad Pro, and then I bought an XLR to Lightning cable to go into the 7th generation iPad that I use as my secondary iPad. And so I think if I were to do an interview like I'm doing tonight, it seems to be working tonight, that I will be able to conduct the interview online through Zoom or something, have Zoom record the audio from the other person's end, and then I can record my end locally here and put that together. So I hope to test that out sometime soon, but I haven't had a chance to put it through its paces just yet.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I've not heard of that kind of cable. That's really cool that even exists.
Yeah, I had no idea either. I searched Amazon on a lark one day and said, this seems like it should be possible. And sure enough, I think there were a couple of options. So I think there are at least one or two. There's at least one out there, and there might be more than one option out there. So,
do you edit podcasts with the pencil?
Yes, but actually, I have kind of a weird podcasting setup. I use the external keyboard, the mouse, and the Apple Pencil all together when I'm editing the podcast. So I don't actually touch the screen at all most of the time.
Okay.
I've tried the whole take the pencil and swipe down on the track to cut it at points, and I could never quite get that motion to work properly for me.
Yeah, I mostly use it to select. So I'll select a batch that I want to delete. That's how I do it.
So what I ended up doing was I used the keyboard shortcuts. I listened back to the podcast because it's primarily me talking. The most common thing that I do when editing is a ripple delete in Ferrite.
Right, so you don't have to worry about lining up different tracks.
Right, exactly. If I'm doing an interview with somebody, that changes, but I can I can still use the keyboard for that. So what I end up doing is I listen to the podcast after I'm done recording it, and then I select the beginning and end points of where I want to. Of what I want to cut. So I'll select one end. I'll use the mouse to put the line, I don't know what you call it. I don't know if you call it a cursor in Ferrite or the basically the track marker, I guess.
Yep, track head.
Okay, the track head. So I'll put the track head where I want it to go. I'll select the track, and I think it's Command T to split a track in Ferrite. I know it if I were to do it. My fingers know it.
Yeah.
And then I go to the other end and I do that. And then you have to be careful to tap out of that selection and then tap back in to select only the section that you want to cut out. And then I've got the Apple Pencil set up to do a ripple delete on the double tap. So I'll just double tap right there and then ripple delete, and I hold the pencil and the mouse in one hand and work with the keyboard in the other as I go through. And I use the space bar to play and everything. So
interesting.
That's how I do that. And every time I make a cut, I always back up 5 or 10 seconds or so and listen to make sure that the cut was pretty smooth going through, and then I proceed from there. So yeah.
So you mentioned earlier there are a couple things you still need a Mac for. You're remoting into a Mac, or what kind of tasks do you still need to do behind a Macintosh?
No, I'm not remoting into a Mac. I have a 2015 11-inch MacBook Air that sits in a drawer next to my desk most of the time. So if I need a Mac, I'll get that out. And it's really just a couple of things. Like I get it out once a week or so and let it sync all of my iCloud Drive files over and everything. And then I run a backup through Carbon Copy Cloner so that I've got a local backup there. Anytime that I need to do a mail merge, like to create labels for something or generate letters that we want to print and send out to people, I have to resort to using Office on the Mac because there's just no way to do it on the iPad. I should back up. I looked into this a couple years ago, and there is an app that I found that works with Google Docs and Google Sheets that purports to allow you to do mail merges from Sheets to Docs, but I've never explored that because I don't know that I could easily set up the format of the document in Google Docs the way that I would want it to be.
Yeah.
And the app costs $30 a year to run that, which is not bad. That's not a bad price for that. But Microsoft has nonprofit pricing for their Office 365, and it's like $2 a month per user. So I spend less money on Office than I would on that single app to do mail merge there. And I've already got the template set up and everything. So I'm fine at this point getting my Mac out to do that. But that's something that I would like to see come to iOS at some point, is the ability to say, I want these two apps to be able to talk to each other. Can you please just create a secure tunnel between them and let them share information back and forth? But at this point, mail merge is really the big thing that I need a Mac for, and that's only, maybe once a year.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be nice, especially with Office apps, if they could figure that out between the same publisher,
Yeah, I think so too. I don't think Apple is likely to bring that to Numbers and Pages. I think that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that's even possible on the Mac versions of those apps at this point, if I remember correctly. I think it used to be, but I don't think it is now.
Right. I believe you're right there. And the 11-inch MacBook Air, what a great piece of kit. I still have. That's my only Mac I own. It's from 2011. Still running nice and fast these days.
Before I got the big iPad Pro, that was my favorite computer. That was hands down and it barely edged it. My first Mac was a 12-inch iBook G4 that I got when I was in seminary, and that I loved for a long. I still have very fond memories of that. But the 11-inch Air,
so good,
is my favorite. It's so good. It's so light, so powerful, so fast, just everything you want in a laptop.
Yeah, and it'd be amazing if they made a modern version of that same physical design. Just, I guess, fill in the bezel with screen, and it could still maybe be a 13-inch screen. I haven't measured it.
Yeah, and I think it had a different screen aspect
60
ratio
by 9,
too.
I think, right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Perfect for
right.
movies,
Yeah, and it let you have that nice full-size keyboard. Like it was great. It was such a good computer, and it was like you said, it was plenty powerful enough for what it needed to do, and it was just the right set of balances and trade-offs for a computer, especially of that era.
Yeah. So anything else you want to touch on? Any requests to Apple for iPad OS or things we missed that you'd like to touch on?
Yeah, I do have some things I wish they would work on, and I've heard a lot of people talking about wanting Apple to redesign the multitasking features and everything like that. And I actually think that the multitasking features are mostly fine. I don't really have an issue with that. My nitpicks are kind of smaller. I'm with every other podcaster and wanting more control over audio, being able to chat in one app and record in another app, and then even just have fine-grained controls over which microphone input to use, whether you're using the good microphone that's hooked up to your iPad or the iPad's internal microphone. You should be able to select that yourself. I would love to be able to make an actual legitimate backup of my iPad to an external drive the way that I can on the Mac. I would love it to pull in my photos and everything, as these things, I know that the iPad was kind of conceived of as a sort of a cloud client device in some ways, but as the storage is getting bigger, I've got 256 gigs on the big iPad Pro, and I know that they go up to it's 1 terabyte, not 2 terabytes.
Yeah, it's
right?
1. Yep.
Okay. I mean, that's plenty of storage space. You should be able to download everything there that you need and then make an actual backup of that. And
be great. Yeah. Even if they have just Time Machine as an option.
Yeah. Just give me something. Give me something to know that I can make an actual backup of my iPad here.
Time Machine also enables you to restore selectively versus just restore the whole device, which is what iCloud Backup provides.
Yeah, that's not great. Thankfully, that doesn't. I don't remember the last time that I had to restore from a backup because of an issue. But you're right. That is, if you have to go back in time, that's the only option you have, and that's not a great option. I would love, along those same lines with a backup, I would love to be able to tell the system that I want an app like Text Expander to work in every text field across the system. I wish they would set up a setting like you have on the Mac where you go into the security settings and you can say, I want to allow full disk access to these apps. You have to do it on the Mac now to get even something like Terminal to work. You have to do that. And I wish on the iPad I could say, look, I really want Text Expander. I trust them. I'm explicitly giving them permission to monitor my keyboard input and expand text there. I trust Time Machine Backup Utility or whatever. In sort of my dream scenario, Carbon Copy Cloner would make an iPad app that would back up your iPad and say, I trust Carbon Copy Cloner to have full access to my iPad's internal drive to make a copy of. I wish we had that kind of control on the iPad. I would love the option to have a horizontal split screen, not just a vertical split screen.
Yes.
Specifically for spreadsheets and even for some, like, trying to view two web pages at the same time if they're wider web pages. I would love to be able to have that option. I would be fine with the default sticking to vertical, but I think we should have the option of, with some gesture or drag combination, getting that to go vertical.
I desperately want the tall iPhone size class to be able to split into two, so you have two like little widget-sized apps next to your main iPad app.
To take one side and split it up in two pieces.
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
Yeah,
it's this very tall, narrow thing, which is great, but sometimes you want that split in half, especially if you're working in vertical mode on your iPad. It's kind of bonkers.
Yeah, no, I think that would be great. I would love to see the ability for shortcuts to automatically save files to a designated folder somewhere in iCloud Drive. Now that Shortcuts is part of the actual OS, I don't think we should be limited just to the Shortcuts folder for that. I would really love to be able to say,
yeah, it's very weird to me that's still a thing.
That almost feels like an oversight, like they just didn't quite get to that one at this point, but I would love to see that. For split screen, I would love for them to show me which app has the keyboard at any given moment so that I know when I'm typing where the text is going.
It's a fun game. You can bet, casino money. It could be a new casino game. Which app has the input?
I guess fun is one word for it. But,
yeah. No, it's a bit of a headache, yeah.
And then my last nitpick that I thought of is I would like to be able to use the Apple Pencil to control the entire interface, including the home indicator and the multitasking and split screen handles for that. It seems
I get why they don't do it, because if I'm drawing and I accidentally go home, that could be annoying, but they should be a nice little option.
Yeah, I there are times when I wish I could just grab that, and it's such a first world problem thing. I've got the pencil in my hand.
How do you use the pencil?
I do some handwritten notes occasionally, specifically if we're doing, if I'm doing like a Bible study at our church or something like that. I'll often use GoodNotes and take notes there. And if I'm using the iPad in my lap and not at my desk, I tend to use the Apple Pencil as the main interface for it instead of my finger, because it's more precise, because I can select what I'm looking for. Although, as cool as Scribble is, it is really frustrating sometimes if I go to tap a button and it thinks that I've tapped into the search field in an app, totally. And then I have to tap back out of it.
And then, anything else we didn't touch on that you want to chat about before we wrap it up?
Just one of the things that I've found with the iPad over the years is that I think it's increasingly possible to use it as your only computer, and only more so as time goes on. I know that I think there will always be conversations about, can an iPad be a real computer? And the answer for a long time has been yes. And now it depends less and less on what you do. It makes you rethink some of the things that makes you rethink the way you would do things, because it's different than a desktop operating system. Of course it's different. It's a touch-based interface and all that, but it's come a long way. But in some ways, I think it can actually be a little bit more cost-effective in the long run, because iPads run forever. They'll run for years and years and years with plenty of processing power overhead. And I'm a big believer in paying for the apps that you use and wanting to make sure that you support developers, because it's not at all fair or reasonable to expect that paying $199 for an app gets you 10 years worth of updates. That's
right.
Not how this works. But apps, by and large, I think somewhat because of what Apple has done to drive the prices down, and somewhat because of just the scale of the iPad and the iPhone, apps tend to be less expensive on iOS. So it's a little bit easier to try something and to get, you can get a really good, task management app for $20 instead of $50, or, you can, and web services still cost what they're going to cost because they're on the web, but the native apps that I think actually tend to work better. They're faster because their storage is local. They're syncing up to the cloud, not reading their data from the cloud when you open them. That's one of the reasons I've stuck with Bear, for example, over Evernote, is that Bear, by being a local app that syncs over CloudKit, is just lightning fast.
Yeah, Bruce Free, this really high-end audio noise removal tool, I think it's like $20 or $10 on the iPad, but it's the same app, same exact app on the Mac is like $100 or $200 just because it's a different ecosystem. Same functionality, all that.
I believe it. And I've never used Logic or Final Cut Pro, but LumaFusion is like $20 or $30, and Ferrite, I think all in to unlock everything is $20. And from what I can gather from people who have used both Ferrite and Logic or LumaFusion and Final Cut Pro, there isn't much of a difference. I mean, there's certainly not hundreds of dollars of difference,
right.
$200 for Logic and $300 for Final Cut Pro. The gap isn't that big from what I can tell.
Yeah, and as many people heard in the last episode of this podcast, the school that I was talking with this instructor, they're using iPad 2s that were released in 2011 up until last year. So that's a good 9 years of use, 2011 to 2020. So they can get a fair amount of use. And even I'd say those processors were probably not doing so hot, but for, elementary school kids did just fine. But I'm just so curious about this current, generation of these. I think we're at 8th generation iPads and these iPad Pros that they're just so fast that I'm just so curious if you didn't have FOMO of not having the newest, latest, best. These things I think could last a pretty long time, like maybe a decade. I don't know.
I don't know. I plan to use this iPad Pro until it's not until it doesn't support
OS
the current
updates.
version of iPad OS, because I mean I've had it for 2.5 years. The battery still is fine. It really runs all day. I still get almost 10 hours of use out of it every day. And I don't think I've ever had an app actually push this thing as much as it does. And I've done some video work, for our church last year when everybody went into lockdown. I do all the podcast editing here, and it just chews through that stuff like it's nothing. And I think I wonder if we're going to see another generation of iPad and iOS apps come up in the next couple of years, because the processors now are just so much more powerful. Like, I mean,
yeah, even these low-end chips, you got the A14 there, that's just a beast.
Yeah, it really is. It laughs at stuff like, email and web browsing and stuff like that. Like, it's just, you're more bogged down by the speed of your internet connection most of the time than you are by the speed of the processor.
Yeah, we upgraded one of our Intel Macs here another family member uses, and they've complained about internet speeds for the longest time. And sure enough, it's just the Intel chip versus the M1. And it was like, it was actually just the chip in there.
Just the processor.
Yeah.
That's why I've heard nothing but good things about the M1 Max. So
yeah, they're impressive. The Mac, I think, has finally surpassed the iPad as far as the battery with those M1 Macs. It's amazing what that battery can do in those things.
I know. For a moment, it made me wish that I still used the Mac long term and that we had room in the budget for it and everything. But I don't think that I could go back. There are certainly things that I could do on the Mac that I can't do on the iPad. There are apps there that just don't exist on the iPad. But the same is true the other way around. Like, I don't think there's any way that I could put together a shortcut that, searches my contacts in a particular group for a particular company that these people are with and constructs asks me for input in that. There probably is a way to do that, but it would probably involve far more AppleScript and stuff than I would even begin to know what to do with. And I can do all that in shortcuts. And it's just, I find the on-device automation and stuff just vastly superior and more accessible for me than what I was doing on the Mac. And I was dabbling in some AppleScripts and stuff, but it was mostly find something similar that somebody else had done and posted online and try to modify it without breaking the whole thing. So not quite as intuitive as shortcuts.
Yeah, they're way different experiences. And I'm happy with a screen I can yank off the keyboard and just grab as a tablet. And there's so many advantages to iPad OS. And I'm sure Macs will get cellular one day, but that for now is still one of the huge things, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. And it also makes my phone more usable. It makes the iPhone, for me at least, worth having more because
share
pretty much everything I do on the iPad. Yeah, exactly. Most apps have settings that share across devices. Your shortcuts show up everywhere. I mean, it's a smaller screen and a different user interface because of the size and everything, and no Apple Pencil and no pointer. But I mean, for me, it makes the iPhone much more, much more powerful, much more usable because of the iPad.
Yeah. Well, with that, where can people find the Shepherd's Crook Orphan Ministry and the work you do there?
You can find us at tscorphans.org. That's the place to go to get links to all of our social media. We're TSC Orphans on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. For the podcast, you can go to podcast.tscorphans.org to see everything there. And then I've got a personal blog, nonprofitworkflows.com, that gets updated maybe once a year or so. I'm hoping to be able to post there a little bit more often. That's basically just a way for me to put in some things that, the idea there is for me to post about things that have come up in the course of working for a nonprofit, some of the specific workflows that I've concocted to complete certain tasks and things like that. So it's not unique to nonprofits, but it's their workflows that have come out of working for a nonprofit.
Well, that's great. And thank you so much for your time chatting. This has been great learning more about what you do and discovering some cool apps like this awesome email search tool that I'm going to have to recommend to some people that have been asking for this kind of tool.
Oh. Well, thank you for having me, Tim. I appreciate that and glad that I could help with, at least a little bit of an app recommendation there. So always happy to do that.
Well, that was my interview with Greg. Thanks again to Greg for his time recording this episode. You can find the extensive show notes for this episode over at iPadPros.net. Greg was kind enough to supply some notes that include many topics we didn't actually have time to cover. All of that is available at iPadPros.net. And my thanks once again to Spark by Readle for sponsoring this episode. Learn more at sparkmailapp.com. And finally, my thanks to you for tuning in to this episode. I appreciate you spending your time with me, and I'll talk to everyone again real soon.